In this guide, why standard OAuth consent breaks down when the resource owner is not present at access time, how UMA2 introduces permission tickets, claims gathering, and requesting party tokens to solve this, how the resource owner sets policies once and the authorization server enforces them asynchronously, and where UMA fits alongside OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, and the emerging GNAP specification. Identity Expert, powering you to be an expert in identity. Here is the scenario. A patient installs a health app and grants it OAuth access to their medical records at a hospital's API standard OAuth. The app gets a token, the patient clicks approve, and the app can read their lab results, prescriptions, and visit history. 6 months later, a pharmaceutical research firm contacts the health app company. They want anonymized patient data for a drug trial study. The app company says yes. After all, the app already has valid OAuth tokens for thousands of patients. The app starts pulling records and forwarding them to the research firm. The patients never consented to this specific use. They consented to the app reading their data, not to the app sharing their data with a third party. But OAuth does not distinguish between these cases. The token is valid. The scopes permit read access. The resource server has no mechanism to check whether the current request aligns with the patient's actual intent. This is the fundamental gap UMA addresses. In standard OAuth, the resource owner grants consent at authorization time, and then the client decides how to use that access. In UMA, the resource owner defines policies that the authorization server enforces continuously, even when the resource owner is asleep, offline, or simply not involved in the current transaction. The resource owner stays in control, not just at consent time, but at every access decision. Think of a hotel with a traditional key system versus a smart lock system. In the traditional hotel, which is how OAuth works, the front desk gives you a room key when you check in. That key opens your room for the duration of your stay. If you hand that key to a friend, the friend can enter your room. The hotel does not know or care who is actually using the key. The door only checks whether the key fits. Now imagine a smart lock system, which is how UMA works. You check in and configure the lock from your phone. You can say, my spouse can enter anytime, room service can enter between 8 and 10 a.m. only, the maintenance crew can enter only if I have filed a repair request. Each person who arrives at the door must identify themselves. The lock checks the current policy you set, not just whether they have a key. If you change your mind while you are at the pool, you update the policy from your phone and the change takes effect immediately. The critical difference: with the traditional key, the hotel delegated access once and lost control. With the smart lock, the guest retains control continuously. The guest does not need to be standing at the door when someone arrives. The lock enforces the guest's policies autonomously. That is exactly what UMA does for digital resources. The resource owner configures policies at the authorization server. The authorization server enforces those policies every time a requesting party shows up, even if the resource owner is offline. 3 problems collide when resource owners need ongoing control over who accesses their resources. Problem 1. Consent is a one-time event. In standard OAuth, the resource owner approves a consent screen once during the authorization code flow. After that, the client holds a token and can use it until it expires or is revoked. The resource owner has no mechanism to add conditions, restrict specific requesting parties, or differentiate between use cases after the initial grant. Problem 2. The resource owner is absent. Many real-world access patterns involve the requesting party arriving when the resource owner is not online. A doctor needs a patient's records at 3 a.m. during an emergency. A business partner needs a shared document while the owner is on vacation. In standard OAuth, if the token has expired, access simply fails. There is no asynchronous policy evaluation. Problem 3. No per-requester policies. OAuth scopes are client-level, not requester level. If an application has the scope to read medical records, every user of that application gets the same level of access. The resource owner cannot say, Dr. Smith can see my lab results, but Dr. Jones can only see my vaccination records. There is no mechanism in OAuth to express per-requesting party access rules. UMA2 solves all 3 by introducing a policy layer between the resource and the requesting party. The resource owner configures these policies once at the authorization server. The authorization server then evaluates every incoming request against the current policy, regardless of when the request arrives or who the requesting party is. UMA2 adds 3 new concepts to the OAuth ecosystem: resource registration, permission tickets, and requesting party tokens. Here is the full flow. Phase 1. Resource registration. The resource owner connects their resource server to the authorization server using the UMA Protection API. The resource server registers each resource. For example, a patient's medical record along with the available scopes, such as read lab results, read prescriptions, and read visit history. The resource owner then configures access policies at the authorization server. Dr. Smith can read lab results and prescriptions. My spouse can read everything. The research portal gets nothing unless I explicitly approve it. Phase 2, access attempt without a token. A requesting party, say Dr. Smith, arrives at the resource server and tries to access the patient's lab results. The requesting party either has no token or has a token that does not cover this resource. The resource server responds with a 401 and includes a permission ticket, a unique reference that encodes what resource was requested, what scopes were needed, and which authorization server issued it. Phase 3, claims gathering. The requesting party takes the permission ticket to the authorization server's token endpoint. The authorization server looks up the resource owner's policy for this resource and determines what claims it needs from the requesting party. It might need proof of identity, proof of professional credentials, or proof of an existing relationship. The requesting party provides those claims, a signed identity token, a professional license attestation, or whatever the policy requires. Phase 4, RPT issuance. If the claims satisfy the policy, the authorization server issues a requesting party token. The RPT, this token is scoped to the specific resource, the specific requesting party, and the specific permissions the policy allows. The requesting party returns to the resource server with the RPT. The resource server validates it and serves the data. The resource owner was never involved in this transaction. They set the policy once, and the authorization server enforced it. Let us look at two key payloads on the wire. First, the permission ticket exchange. When the requesting party hits the resource server without a valid token, the resource server calls the authorization server's permission endpoint. The request body contains the resource identifier, a URI uniquely identifying the patient's record, and the scopes requested, such as read lab results. The authorization server responds with a permission ticket, a short-lived opaque string that encodes the access request. Second, the RPT request. The requesting party posts to the authorization server's token endpoint. The grant type is EARN IETF params OAuth grant type UMA ticket. The ticket field carries the permission ticket from the previous step. The claim token field carries the requesting party's identity proof, typically a signed JWT from the requesting party's own identity provider. The claim token format tells the authorization server how to parse it. If the policy is satisfied, the authorization server responds with an access token. The RPT inside the RPT, the payload carries the requesting party's identity in the subclaim, the resource owner's identity in a separate field, the specific resource URI in the audience, the granted permissions, which may be a subset of what was requested, and an expiration. The resource server checks all of these before serving data. It confirms that the requesting party matches the sub, that the audience matches its own resource, and that the permissions cover the operation. This layered validation is what makes UMA fundamentally different from a simple bearer token. Threat 1, permission ticket replay. An attacker intercepts a permission ticket and replays it at the authorization server, attaching their own claims. If the authorization server does not bind the ticket to the original requesting party's session, the attacker receives an RPT for someone else's access request. Mitigation. Tickets must be single-use, short-lived, under 60 seconds, and ideally bound to a client session or a pushed authorization request reference. Threat 2, overpermissioning through policy misconfiguration. The resource owner creates a policy that is too broad, for example, granting read access to all resources for anyone with a valid identity token without checking role or relationship. A malicious requesting party with any valid identity can access everything. Mitigation. Authorization servers should provide policy templates with sensible defaults. Policies should require at least two claim types, identity plus role or identity plus relationship, and the authorization server should flag overly broad policies during configuration. Threat 3, claims token forgery. The requesting party submits a forged identity token as their claim. If the authorization server does not validate the token's signature against the issuing identity provider's public keys, the forged claims are accepted and an RPT is issued. Mitigation. The authorization server must validate every claim token's signature, issuer, and audience. Claim tokens from unknown issuers must be rejected. Trust relationships between the authorization server and claim token issuers must be pre-configured. Threat 4, consent fatigue and policy abandonment. The resource owner is asked to configure policies for hundreds of resources. They either accept overly broad defaults or stop managing policies entirely, effectively disabling UMA's protections. Mitigation. Group resources into collections with inherited policies. Changes to a collection policy cascade to all resources in the group. Provide a dashboard showing who accessed what and when, so the resource owner can audit without managing every individual policy. UMA's trajectory is converging with two major forces in the authorization landscape. First, GNAP, the Grant Negotiation and Authorization Protocol, is being designed as a successor to OAuth 2 and incorporates many of UMA's core ideas natively. GNAP's interaction model supports asynchronous authorization by default, meaning the resource owner can approve or deny access requests after the fact without the requesting party needing to wait. GNAP also supports fine-grained resource descriptions and per-request policy evaluation, which were bolted onto OAuth through UMA but are first-class concepts in GNAP. Second, verifiable credentials are changing how claims gathering works. Instead of the authorization server needing to trust a specific identity provider's tokens, the requesting party can present a verifiable credential, a cryptographically signed attestation from any trusted issuer, as their claim. The authorization server verifies the credential's signature without needing a direct trust relationship with the issuer. This makes UMA's claims gathering step more flexible and more privacy-preserving. The direction is clear. UMA2 is the bridge between today's OAuth-based consent model and tomorrow's fine-grained, user-centric authorization landscape. Whether the future runs on UMA3 or on GNAP, the core principle remains. The resource owner controls access, not the application. All primary sources cited in this guide are on screen now. You will find the UMA2 grant specification from the Kantara Initiative, the UMA Federated Authorization Specification, RFC 6749 for the OAuth 2 baseline, the GNAP specification for where the authorization landscape is heading, and the W3C Verifiable Credentials standard for the future of claims gathering. Direct links are in the video description. If this breakdown clarified how user-managed access works and why it matters beyond standard OAuth, subscribe to Identity Expert. We cover one protocol deep dive every week. Thanks for watching. If there is an identity standard, authorization pattern, or protocol you want us to break down next, drop it in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an Identity Expert episode.